What's up, people? I wanted to do a quick little review video for you on Civil War and Reconstruction. Unfortunately, we didn't get enough time to talk about Reconstruction, which is sad because it is like the one I think it's important, and we definitely will talk about when we get to the Civil Rights Movement. But I also just find it incredibly interesting in general. But kind of go through some of the things you want to take a look at when you're studying and maybe like fill in some gaps and just show you where some of the resources are. So first off, this is the Unit 3 Student Organizer 1.0. It's where you're going to find all the big objectives and terms and major events of this unit. So make sure you have it somewhere, and that was where this is where I would start. Okay, so first off, these are the big events that you should have a general understanding of up until pretty much 1870. So we didn't really get time to talk about these parts right here, so I'm going to cross them out a little bit. So this time period starts with the end of the Mexican-American War, which was part of the last unit and expansion, which gives America the Mexican cession and the Southwest United States, California, border of Texas, and it's going to lead to the Compromise of 1850. So it says right there, the Compromise of 1850 kind of like solves the problem of the Mexican cession, although it kicks the can down the road and kind of allows for an agreement. It doesn't really, get a lot of the main issues out of the way related to slavery. So Kansas-Nebraska Act comes in 1854, followed by the Dred Scott decision, John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, and then finally the kind of powder keg moment is the election of 1860, where Abraham Lincoln is elected and the secession begins. So this time period is kind of like one chunk that you want to think about up until Abraham Lincoln's election, which is where the Civil War starts. So it officially begins in 1861 with the attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. We didn't talk about that event like really in depth, but that's just kind of what starts it off. 1862 is the Battle of Antietam. If I put it on the timeline, it means it's probably pretty significant. So it's going to show up again. So make sure you know why that battle specifically is significant. Leads into the Emancipation Proclamation, Vicksburg, and the Battle of Gettysburg. Again, two very, very important key turning point battles. So make sure that you understand what those are and why they're significant. By 1865, Confederacy surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse. You have the end of the Civil War. Lincoln is assassinated, and you have the 13th Amendment adopted. I think that's a pretty important one. Make sure you know what that one is. If you don't know, I'm going to do a quick run through of the assassination, end of the Civil War, and the 13th Amendment. So the next thing I want to do is make sure you know where all your resources are. So I'm going to pull up teams really quickly and go through and, sorry, this is IB history. Let's just take my 3B history. It's going to look the same if you're in 4B. But if you go to the files section of the general channel right here and go into class materials, we are currently in Unit 3. So everything is there right now except for the slideshow 3.3, which I will put in there, or sorry, 3.1, which I'll put in there shortly, which is about the Civil War itself. But everything's broken down by topic. So the first topic we covered was slavery and sectionalism. We did the slavery notes and posted activity. So you want to take a look at your copy of those. We also did have the 2 readings on responses to slavery. So if I go back and I look at what does my objective look like for that topic? Well, it's got compare and contrast the development of the North and the South in relation to slavery. And I kind of broke that down into a couple questions. How did the North and the South develop in similar and different ways? And then how did slavery impact this development? These are the terms that go with that one, but you should be able to find those in that slideshow. So that first slideshow, going back to teams, slavery and sectionalism, and the notes should have an example, because we talked about things like the market revolution and the shift to manufacturing and how the South produced the raw materials for northern factories like cotton, predominantly cotton, and that led to manufacturing in the North. So they were what we said interdependent or linked to one another, but also regionally divided in terms of relying on slave labor versus free labor, agrarian or agricultural economy versus market economy, so on and so forth. We also talked about the cotton gin, which was important in making it much easier to produce cotton and much more cheaply and efficiently, which led to an increase in the demand of slaves, and how we had the solidification or the solidifying of the plantation system in the South, which relied on slave labor. So that's how these things fit together. A nice thing for you to do here, if you want to do, instead of, people say like, I read my notes or I read over the handouts, take those handouts, make yourself a nice little like Venn diagram or chart in here. Like you could insert a table and be like, talk about similarities and differences, or you could do north and south, and then also and list some examples and make sure you can use the terms in there as well. Then we moved on. We did an activity on how enslaved Africans resisted or responded to slavery, and we broke it down into two overarching methods, which were overt. Remember, overt means over or open, so in the open resistance. And covert has the word cover in it. That's how I used to I like to remember. I also like covert operations in the Cold War, but hidden, right? It's going to be examples. So knowing a few examples of this, and we kind of broke it down. The way I was trying to focus it was how they did this to preserve their kind of lifestyle and culture, and maybe religious aspects as well, and then also their family systems. So knowing a couple examples of those are going to be good. So once again, if I go back to teams, and this should be in your files as well because you did the work, right? You have that notes sheet that has some of that information, and then you've got the responses to enslavement readings as well if you want to go back and read those. So that's topic one. Pretty short and sweet overview of how these things were developing related to slavery during that time. The second topic is on secession and the cause of the Civil War, which is probably the most complicated of the topics. You watched a video. You can go back to that video. I believe it's on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. You can go back to the at-home assignment and find the link. But you had a note sheet. That note sheet was 2.2, causes, short-term causes notes guide. So I kind of broke it down. This is a little bit different than the one that we did in class. I'm going to just check my time quick. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, I'm about halfway. I get 15 minutes. So I broke it down like this. These are kind of the long-term overarching structures that caused sectionalism or regional division between the North and the South, particularly. So you had northern states banning slavery early on after the Revolution, regional economies, so the South relied on slavery, beginning of the international slave trade, or sorry, not the beginning, the banning of the international slave trade. Some people put the Missouri Compromise in here as well. Some people even put the Compromise of 1850 in long term. I can see that. I understand that. So that's fine as well. For short term, just having an understanding of these different terms, how they relate to issues between the North and the South. So Compromise of 1850, the things that it tried to solve but didn't solve. The Fugitive Slave Act, how that upset Northerners and their lack of execution or enforcement of that law really angered the Southerners. Kansas-Nebraska Act is the really big one that you want to make sure you pay attention to, leading to Bleeding Kansas and two different governments in Kansas. John Brown obviously comes out of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, but leads a raid on Harper's Ferry. Dred Scott decision emboldens the South. And then my immediate cause I had was Lincoln's election, Southern secession. Once again, don't fall into the common understanding that Lincoln was a radical abolitionist. He didn't want to expand slavery. That was really part of the Republican Party's platform during that time. It was called the Free Soil Platform, so not allowing slavery to expand. So those are kind of the quick rundown of the events that happened in this kind of 12-year period that leads to the Civil War. Next thing we did was the last topic, which was the war and emancipation. So 1861 to 1865. If you go back to teams once again, or OneNote, you'll notice you've got the Union and Confederacy strategies activity. So it was basically, we took some notes on who had the advantages in terms of manpower, economic power, and political power. Then we just kind of switched over and just talked about the main significant leaders of each side. So we did go into strategy. So we talked about how this political cartoon demonstrates the Union strategy, also known as the Anaconda Plan. So starting out doing a lot of the fighting, trying to take control of Virginia, blockading the southern ports, and then also moving people over to take control of the Mississippi River. So you've got, the big battles associated with this area here are Antietam and Gettysburg. Big battle over here is Vicksburg, and then you also had Sherman's March to the Sea, which comes later in the war, which is the part of what's called total war or destroying civilian property as well. The Southerners took more an offensive defensive strategy. There's a nice little blurb that talks about that here, but it's also in my slideshow. So the other big activity from this was the Civil War turning points activity. Kind of go back and look at that. Shoot. Check my time one more time. 10 minutes. Got 5 minutes left. I got to make sure I go quick. So you want to start breaking down and looking at, okay, what did I have on that turning points activity? What did I say for those assessment questions? Kind of giving a broad overview. But if you want to know what do I really need to know, you want to make sure that you have these terms right down here. So you got to know these events. Okay, Emancipation Proclamation is also going to be very important. In fact, I think I might have changed it a little bit for this year. Let me check 3B's study guide. Nope, I didn't. I just took out Fort Sumter. Okay. Gettysburg Address, we didn't really go over. I might mention it a little bit, but I wouldn't worry too much about having a definition for that. But Battle of Antietam, Gettysburg, Sherman's March to the Sea, Vicksburg be another good one. Lincoln's assassination, Emancipation Proclamation are going to be important turning point events. So knowing some of those and why they're significant are important. Last thing I'll leave you with, because I'm running out of time, is you don't need to know topic 4, Reconstruction. However, on my slides, this is the 3.1 that I'll post in Teams. This goes over the main battles and things like that. There's a couple things that can help you later on. So I do have a key battles animation that you can click on and watch. It also goes over some of the big overview things that happen if you miss something on the turning points assignment. Key thing about the Emancipation Proclamation, if you didn't hear this in class, or it might prompt you to see it again, is that, is that originally Lincoln did not want to free the slaves. He talked about how if he could save the Union without freeing any slave, he would do it. And if he could do it by freeing all of them, he would do it. And if he could free some and not others, he would also do that. That's all part of his idea of not modifying slavery as it exists. However, with the Emancipation Proclamation, that changes things. It establishes that all slaves in rebel territory should be declared free starting in 1863, which does not actually free slaves because the Confederacy saw themselves as another country. But what it does do is it shifts the tone so that now it pretty much guarantees that Britain and France will stay out of the war and not help the South, which was something the South was relying on. Lincoln gets assassinated on April 14th, 1865 by John Wilkes Booth, who was a Southern sympathizer. He thought that maybe this would allow for the South to recontinue the war or take up the war effort again. And the other thing that it leads to is this big question of how will the nation come back together, because it's kind of incomplete at this point. And that leads to a whole bunch of problems in Reconstruction, which hopefully we'll talk about with civil rights next time you have me. That's my favorite picture ever. Finally, knowing a couple of these effects is going to be important. The one that I think is probably most important is obviously the debate over slavery is over, but the key thing is that you have the 13th Amendment, which declares that slavery is unconstitutional, so you cannot have slavery unless people are in prison. A little bit different. Also gives African Americans free or citizenship rights with the 14th Amendment. Obviously, population 620,000 men are killed, and then more women also start looking for more rights at this time now that more rights are being given to African Americans. Politically, the Union's restored. One key political thing that comes out of this is that it reinforces the power of the federal government, the national government over the state governments. So showing the federal government is supreme overall, gives the Republican Party a whole bunch of power for the next 10 years. And then economically, there's rising prices, especially in the South. Congress begins efforts to rebuild the South. Railroads, once again, start rebuilding railroads and opening up more of the West to settlement. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of the things that were going on. But that's how I would review, is go through that review guide. So we're doing, got 30 seconds left. Review guide, make yourself some kind of like graphic organizers that use the terminology. That'll help you out a lot. So this is a good graphic organizer to use, but also maybe thinking about turning points, like what changed as a result of these? Why are these significant? Okay, so thinking about that and explaining it to somebody will be helpful as well. So do something with the content, but I showed you where everything was and kind of the main things that you need to know. So hopefully this was helpful for you.